My mother was taken to Belzec. Belzec was one of the 6 death camps in Poland. And of course, we never saw her again. Soon, my sister and I, Blanca and I, Norbert, her husband, and my father were taken to our first camp. The very first camp was Plaszów. Plaszów was not an extermination camp, for lack of better words. It is truly, there's such a lack of words in this piece of history. What I mean by saying not an extermination camp is that we didn't have any crematoria and there were no gas chambers. But there was a hill where people were stripped of their clothing, they were shot, they were dropped into a ravine, and their bodies were burned. It was a pretty awful place. There were hangings, there were lots of public hangings. I have a long poem about the hanging of a young boy and an old man. The young boy was hanged because he sang a Russian song, and so the punishment is just something that is mind-boggling. There were dogs that would tear people apart. We had a commandant who was a real monster. He would come inspecting us at work. One time when I was digging ditches and building the road from the Jewish stones of the Jewish cemetery on which the camp was built. We were breaking up the stones, and he came by and didn't like the way my friend's mother was working, so he took out a gun and shot her. He would order prisoners to run, and he would shoot for target practice. It was a pretty awful place. We had all kinds of floggings, all kinds of public punishment. But I was with my sister, and I was with her all the time. And being with her was a great comfort. And of course, this was not a camp that was as bad, and everything is so relative, and there's such a lack of words. It was not as high security either, not as high security as, for instance, Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen. And I want to share another poem with you, which makes me feel a little better. It's a poem about my father. My father and Norbert were in the men's part of the camp, my sister and I together in the women's part. And I sneaked in to see my father one day. And there was a boy, probably also cheating about his age, playing a harmonica. And you already have an idea how dangerous it was to have anything personal because of that boy who was hanged when he sang a Russian song. But still, he hung on to that very precious thing that he had, and he played his harmonica. And my father looked at me and said, "You and I never had a chance to dance together." And I call this poem Victory. I danced with you that one time only. How sad you were, how tired, lonely. You knew that they would take you soon, so when your bunkmate played a tune, you whispered, "Little one, let us dance. We may not have another chance." To grasp this moment, sense the mood, your arms around me felt so good. The ugly barracks disappeared. There was no hunger and no fear. Oh, what a sight. Just you and I, my lovely father once big and strong, and me, a child condemned to die. I thought, how long before the song must end? There are no tools to measure love, and only fools would fail to scale your victory. And my father was taken away shortly after that with Norbert. They were taken to Mauthausen, to another unspeakable place. And my father was killed just weeks before the end of the war. My next camp was Auschwitz. My sister and I were taken to Auschwitz. Auschwitz, I think, is probably the most notorious of all death factories. The smell of Auschwitz is something that I will never forget, especially when I hear and read about historical revisionists distortionists, people who claim that the Holocaust never happened. I wish it hadn't, but it did. And the smell of Auschwitz is always there to remind me. I remember Auschwitz as being very cold. I remember the selections, who is to live and who is to die. I remember being very wet and very cold. And I remember being dismissed before we got our numbers and our heads shaved. So many people were brought in that time, that particular day, that they never shaved our heads or put numbers on our arms. From Auschwitz, we were taken on the death march. Now, the death march from Auschwitz has been written and discussed many, many times. It was January 16th. We were taken on this march, about 60,000 people, certainly not dressed for a hike in the winter. It was very cold. The roads were very slippery. We lived mostly on snow. And I remember my sister would not let me sleep because it was very easy to die in the snow. And of course, if you died, you were left. If you could not keep up with the column, if you could not march fast enough, if you were lucky, you rated a bullet. If not, you just dropped by the roadside. And so every morning, the roads were loaded, strewn with bodies, with people who just didn't make it. And I remember just wanting to lie down and die. And of course, my sister would always push me and poke me and drag me along, and she would not let me die. And of course, through all the other horrors, she was always there, supporting me, helping, always finding that extra piece of bread. After many, many days, the death march for us ended. They found some cattle cars, and they took us into Bergen-Belsen. Of course, cattle cars are a whole other universe, too. These cattle cars were open, so we were covered with snow, and we lived literally on snow. Also, occasionally going through Czechoslovakia, I remember there were some brave Christian farmers who would throw potatoes, raw potatoes, into the cattle car. And I usually talk about that because there was so much horror, so much collaboration among the native populations, especially in Poland, that I like to point out that there were some brave people who occasionally saved a Jewish child or even a family. And of course, those we call the righteous among the nations. They are indeed.